Meghan had not entered the gathering blindly. She came because a quiet message from Kate appeared to offer protection, dignity, and a chance to end years of hostility. But somewhere between that private promise and Camilla's public comment, the terms had changed, and Meghan was never warned. For weeks, the invitation had moved through the palace in whispers. Nothing had been sent in language that could later be called a guarantee. Instead, discreet messages passed between aides, Harry, and figures close to Kate, each one carefully shaped to suggest that Meghan would be treated with respect. Kate's approval was never declared openly, but it was strongly implied. That implication became the reason Meghan finally considered returning. She understood that this was not true reconciliation. The palace was not offering an apology, and no one was promising that the wounds of the past would be discussed honestly. This was a test. Meghan would be allowed back into a royal setting, but only under conditions designed to protect the family's image. She could attend. She could smile. She could help create the appearance of unity. What she could not do was control the meaning of her presence. That was exactly what frightened her. Meghan feared becoming a symbolic guest, visible enough to prove that the monarchy had moved beyond the conflict, yet powerless to challenge how she was positioned, addressed, or remembered. She initially refused. Harry, however, believed the assurances. He told her that the seating had been handled carefully, that introductions would be respectful, and that private conversations would be controlled. Most importantly, he had been told there would be no surprise confrontation. Kate's involvement made those promises feel possible. She had allegedly been presented as the neutral figure, the one person capable of preventing old hostility from exploding between Meghan and Camilla. To Meghan, that carried emotional weight. Years of comparison, silence, leaked stories, and unspoken resentment had poisoned whatever trust once existed between the two women. Yet Kate's quiet approval seemed to offer the smallest opening. Not friendship, not forgiveness, just recognition that the damage had been real. But the invitation came with invisible boundaries. Meghan was expected to avoid any discussion of titles, security, inheritance, or the future standing of her children. Her return would be tolerated only if she remained inside the limits chosen for her. Camilla objected even to that. Privately, she argued that Meghan could not be allowed to return as though nothing had changed. In her view, forgiveness without submission would weaken royal authority, and suggest that walking away carried no lasting cost. Then, shortly before Meghan arrived, the conversation order was altered. Camilla was placed beside her during the most sensitive discussion of the evening. Kate learned about the change. She knew what it could mean, yet no warning reached Meghan. That silence raised a darker question. Had Kate chosen not to speak, or had she been reminded that defending Meghan could place her own loyalty under suspicion? As the future queen, Catherine's position depended upon discipline, unity, and obedience to the institution she would one day help lead. Any intervention could be portrayed as sympathy for Meghan over loyalty to William and the crown. By the time Meghan took her seat, the apparent peace offering had already become something else entirely, a test designed not to welcome her back, but to determine whether she would accept her reduced place. Camilla did not need to order Meghan from the room. She only needed to create a choice: remain seated and accept the judgment, or walk out and prove every warning whispered inside the palace. The trap was elegant, deniable, and almost impossible to escape. For Camilla, royal authority had never depended entirely on direct commands. The monarchy's strongest rules were rarely announced aloud. They were felt. A pause before a greeting, a carefully assigned seat, a name missing from a conversation, these small signals told people where they stood. Real control came from making others understand the boundaries around them, without forcing the palace to admit those boundaries existed. Meghan's return threatened that system because she had already shown that she would not always obey its silent language. She had challenged private customs, rejected restrictions she considered unfair, and spoken publicly about experiences the palace expected to remain hidden. To Camilla, that made her unpredictable. Meghan was not simply returning as a family member. She was returning as someone who had escaped royal control and survived. The danger was larger than personal dislike. Camilla feared Meghan could appear briefly, behave with dignity, claim the moral victory of reconciliation, and leave with her royal legitimacy restored. One peaceful evening might allow Meghan to present herself as accepted again without surrendering anything in return. Inside the palace, that possibility was seen as a threat. Advisors had warned Camilla against an obvious confrontation. A direct attack could make Meghan appear cornered, humiliated, and unfairly targeted. It could damage the monarchy far beyond the room. So Camilla chose something safer. She spoke broadly about sacrifice, duty, and those who expected royal privileges without accepting royal responsibility. No name was mentioned. No accusation was formally made. Anyone who objected could be accused of turning an innocent reflection into a personal grievance. But everyone understood. The gathering became a silent loyalty test. Who looked toward Meghan? Who avoided her eyes? Who showed concern? Who remained loyal to Camilla by pretending the remark meant nothing? Kate recognized the trap immediately. She had spent years learning how royal criticism was delivered through suggestion rather than confrontation. She knew that defending Meghan could look like a public challenge to Camilla's authority. Yet remaining silent would destroy the fragile trust Meghan believed Kate had offered. Harry understood it too. Anger rose quickly, and he prepared to answer. But Meghan stopped him. She would not allow the moment to become another story about Harry losing control while the original insult disappeared beneath the reaction. So Meghan chose the only power still available to her. She left. It was an act of self-protection, but it was also the response Camilla had anticipated. Within minutes, those closest to the Queen could describe Meghan as unable to accept honest discussion, unwilling to remain composed, and still unsuited to royal life. That raised the darkest possibility of all. Perhaps the palace had not merely expected Meghan to walk out. Perhaps it needed her to. Her departure could become the reason to exclude her from a decision far more important than one gathering. That decision was not about one dinner, one insult, or even one broken relationship, because hidden beneath the confrontation was a dispute involving Meghan's children, their royal identity, and what they might one day inherit. Behind the polite conversation sat a question powerful enough to divide the monarchy. What, if anything, would Meghan's children inherit from the royal world they had left behind? Titles were only the beginning. The deeper dispute involved private property, family jewels, and a legacy the palace feared Meghan might claim. The gathering had taken place at a moment when senior royals were quietly reviewing the future of the family's most personal possessions. These were not ceremonial objects controlled by the crown, nor treasures whose ownership followed public rules. They were private jewels, handwritten letters, portraits, keepsakes, and heirlooms that could be passed from one generation to another without any official announcement. That secrecy made them more powerful. Meghan had allegedly learned that several items connected to Diana were being discussed inside the family. Harry believed at least some of them should one day pass to his children, not because of rank or royal duty, but because Diana was their grandmother. To him, that bond could not be cancelled by distance, departure, or palace anger. Camilla's circle saw the matter differently. A jewel once worn by Diana, later appearing on Meghan or eventually inherited by her daughter, could become far more than a family possession. It could become a symbol, It could allow Diana's emotional legacy to live outside palace control, attached to a branch of the family that no longer followed royal rules. That possibility unsettled those protecting the monarchy's image. Meghan had agreed not to raise inheritance during the gathering. She had been warned that titles, security, and the future standing of her children were forbidden subjects. Yet some senior royals suspected her attendance carried another purpose. They feared she hoped to reopen access to objects and privileges that had quietly moved beyond Harry's reach. Kate understood the danger better than most. She already wore pieces associated with Diana and knew the emotional force they carried. Those jewels were not merely valuable. They connected the present monarchy to a woman whose memory still shaped public loyalty, family pain, and the rivalry between William and Harry. Privately, Kate had argued that Harry's children should not be erased from Diana's personal legacy simply because their parents had left royal duties. Camilla learned of that position and began to question whether Catherine was allowing sympathy to interfere with the long-term interests of the crown. Suddenly, Camilla's comment about sacrifice carried a second meaning. Those who walked away, it suggested, could not expect continued access to everything they had left behind. Meghan heard that message immediately. Her reaction seemed sudden only to those who did not know what was already being discussed. She was not responding to one sentence. She was responding to the possibility that her children were being quietly separated from their own family history. Then, after Meghan's departure, Harry received confirmation that one significant item connected to Diana had been removed from an informal inheritance discussion only days earlier. Yet the missing heirloom was only part of the shock, because the decision had not come from Camilla alone, and the name attached to the final approval threatened to fracture Harry's relationship with William beyond repair. Harry expected Camilla to resist Meghan. He did not expect William's name to appear beside the decision. Suddenly, Kate's silence looked different, not like indifference, but like the obedience of a woman trapped between her private conscience and the man she would one day stand beside as queen. William had approved a wider review of private royal possessions, one presented as necessary protection against future conflict. The language was careful. It did not accuse Meghan. It did not mention Harry's children. It spoke instead of preserving family assets, preventing confusion over ownership, and keeping emotionally sensitive objects away from public disputes. On paper, it looked responsible. In practice, the restrictions fell most heavily on Harry's side of the family. William defended the decision as institutional, not personal. Anything connected to Diana carried enormous power. A letter, a jewel, or a private keepsake could be transformed into a public symbol. It could be used to challenge the palace's version of events, strengthen a commercial image, or reopen wounds the monarchy wanted sealed. To William, control was not cruelty. It was protection. Harry saw betrayal. William understood better than anyone what Diana's possessions meant. He knew they were not simply valuable objects. They were fragments of a mother both brothers had lost too early. To Harry, denying his children access to that legacy felt like William was claiming Diana for one branch of the family and quietly erasing the other. Kate had challenged him in private. She warned that excluding Harry's children would not heal the conflict. It would turn a present disagreement into a generational punishment, ensuring that resentment survived long after the current feud ended. William rejected that argument. He believed Kate underestimated Meghan's ability to turn royal symbols into international influence. A single Diana-linked item could restore emotional authority to Meghan's public image and allow her to stand outside the monarchy while still drawing power from its most painful history. The disagreement placed Kate in an impossible position. She attended the gathering knowing William expected her to support the family's decision in public, even if she continued to oppose parts of it behind closed doors. Then Camilla delivered the comment. Kate immediately understood that defending Meghan would expose more than disagreement with the Queen. It could reveal the private fracture between herself and William. Her intervention might be seen as disloyalty to her husband, resistance to the future crown, and proof that she placed personal sympathy above royal unity. So she remained silent. That silence protected William. It protected the institution she would one day help lead. It protected her own place within it. But it abandoned Meghan at the exact moment Kate's earlier involvement had seemed to promise safety. After Meghan left, Kate did not follow her. She did not speak to Harry. Yet, she did not defend Camilla either. She remained caught between both sides, knowing her stillness would soon be judged by everyone. Camilla would question whether Kate's private sympathy weakened her loyalty. Meghan would remember her silence as the most painful part of the humiliation. And William would expect that silence to continue. Outside the room, however, Meghan was no longer thinking about palace strategy or William's approval. She was confronting Harry with a far more personal question. Had he known this could happen before bringing her back? Meghan had endured Camilla's judgment, but Harry's hesitation wounded her more. In the corridor, away from the frozen gathering, she demanded the truth. Had he brought her into a reconciliation or into a royal ambush he had been too afraid to reveal? Meghan kept moving after leaving the room. Palace aides approached with quiet offers of help, but she refused them all. She did not want explanations, sympathy, or another carefully managed conversation. At that moment, every person connected to the gathering felt like part of the same machinery that had invited her in, tested her composure, and waited to see whether she would break. Harry caught up with her, but his first words made everything worse. Instead of acknowledging the humiliation, he tried to explain Camilla. He said the comment reflected old fears inside the palace. He suggested it had been aimed at the wider issue of duty, not at Meghan alone. But Meghan had heard enough excuses. She asked him directly whether he knew that titles, inheritance, and Diana's possessions were already being discussed before they arrived. Harry hesitated. That pause gave her the answer before he spoke. He admitted that he had heard rumors of a review. He knew private belongings were being reconsidered and that William had supported tighter control. But he insisted he had not known Camilla would turn the gathering into a public warning. To Meghan, that distinction meant very little. She accused Harry of minimizing palace threats because some part of him still believed obedience might restore what he had lost. He still wanted recognition from Charles. He still wanted William to see him as a brother rather than a danger. And every time that hope returned, Meghan feared he became willing to overlook the warning signs. Their argument exposed the divide beneath everything else. Harry wanted proof that his family had not completely rejected him. Meghan believed every return placed them back inside a system built to control their choices, their image, and even their children's connection to the past. Then she told him what had hurt most. During Camilla's comment, Meghan had watched Kate. She had waited for one word, one movement, one sign that the promise of protection had been real. Nothing came. Harry defended Kate carefully. He suggested she may have been trapped, unable to speak without challenging William or weakening her own position. Meghan rejected that defense. Royal silence, she said, was never neutral when it allowed someone else to be humiliated. Before Harry could answer, an aide arrived with a message. Camilla was prepared to continue the evening if Meghan returned and accepted that the comment had been misunderstood. The demand was clear. Meghan was expected to apologize for reacting, while Camilla would apologize for nothing. She refused. Harry looked back toward the room, knowing what his absence would mean. Then he stayed beside Meghan. When Harry failed to return, the palace could no longer dismiss Meghan's departure as a private emotional reaction. It had become a challenge to Camilla's authority. And someone inside the room would now be forced to take responsibility. Kate's silence had protected the room from immediate chaos, but it could not protect her forever. Once Harry remained outside with Meghan, Camilla demanded to know where the Princess of Wales stood, and Kate's answer revealed that her silence had concealed a warning of its own. Harry's absence quickly became impossible to ignore. What had begun as Meghan's sudden departure was now something far more serious. The room could no longer pretend that she had simply needed a moment to recover. Harry had followed her, remained beside her, and refused to return. His choice had transformed a private insult into an open challenge to the authority behind it. Almost immediately, the discussion shifted from what had happened to how it would be explained. Camilla insisted that Meghan had deliberately exaggerated a harmless comment in order to create another grievance. In her view, offering an apology would reward the very behavior the gathering had been designed to test. Meghan had walked out. Harry had followed. The responsibility, Camilla argued, belonged entirely to them. William was less interested in blame than containment. He instructed the aides to prevent any account of the confrontation from reaching the media before the palace agreed on a single version. No unofficial sympathy. No private briefing. No language that suggested Meghan had been targeted. The institution needed control before emotion became the story. Through all of this, Kate was barely included, despite being the person everyone had watched when Camilla made the remark. Her silence had been treated as support, but no one had asked whether she actually agreed. Camilla finally forced the question. Did Kate believe the comment had been inappropriate? Continued silence was no longer possible. Yet Kate did not defend Meghan personally. Instead, she warned that Camilla's remark had turned a private inheritance dispute into an emotional confrontation the palace could no longer manage. Meghan's departure would not look like oversensitivity. It would look like proof that the family had invited her back only to remind her that she no longer stood among them as an equal. Camilla's response was sharp. She accused Kate of offering sympathy after refusing to intervene when it mattered. The contradiction was undeniable. Kate had remained silent while Meghan was humiliated, then criticized the strategy once the damage had already been done. Kate did not deny it. She argued that speaking inside the room would have created a direct battle between herself and Camilla. But the greater mistake, she said, had been designing the test in the first place. The palace had created a situation in which every possible reaction could be used against Meghan. William was angered by the challenge, especially because Kate had made it in front of others. Yet even he understood the danger she described. The monarchy could control an official statement. It could not control what the silence would come to mean. Then Kate went further. She proposed returning the Diana-linked heirloom to the inheritance discussion, not as a concession to Meghan, but as protection for Harry's children and their place within the family's private history. Camilla refused. She warned that emotion could not be allowed to weaken royal authority, and that Kate's position might one day make her unfit to exercise the power expected of a queen. The confrontation had now moved beyond Meghan and Camilla, exposing a struggle between the present queen and the future one, but the final blow would come from a document no one expected Harry to see. By morning, the palace had prepared a calm explanation for Meghan's departure. Then, Harry saw the document. Written before the gathering, it outlined what aides should do if Meghan became distressed, and left early proving that the palace had anticipated the walkout before Camilla ever spoke. The note reached Harry through a palace contact who had quietly watched the evening collapse and no longer believed the gathering had been arranged in good faith. It was not an emotional message or a piece of private gossip. It was a planning document, written in the restrained language of risk, protocol, and damage control. Yet beneath that careful wording sat something explosive. The palace had prepared for Meghan to leave. One section described the steps aides should take if she became distressed and exited before the gathering ended. Another anticipated Harry following her. The official explanation had already been drafted in principle, a private family misunderstanding, handled calmly, with no effect on the evening's formal purpose. The timing changed everything. This document had existed before Meghan arrived, before Camilla made the comment, and before Harry chose to remain outside with his wife. That meant senior staff had believed a confrontation was likely. Or worse, someone had already known one would be created. The instructions were precise. Aides were not to pursue Meghan in a way that might attract attention. No immediate apology was to be offered. The official schedule was to continue without visible disruption, preserving the impression that the monarchy remained steady while Meghan alone had lost control. Then, Harry found the line that made the entire evening feel colder. Kate's role was listed as maintaining visible neutrality. The phrase explained why her silence had seemed so complete. She had not merely frozen under pressure. She may have been briefed to avoid any intervention that could be interpreted as taking Meghan's side. But that knowledge did not absolve her. To Harry, Kate had still accepted the instruction, knowing Meghan believed she would act as a safeguard against humiliation. Meghan read the note differently. She saw proof that the palace had expected an emotional reaction and was ready to use it against her. If she remained seated, she accepted the judgment. If she walked out, she confirmed the old claim that she could not survive royal pressure. Every path had been designed to lead to the same conclusion. Camilla's remark now appeared less like an isolated insult and more like the trigger in a wider strategy: force Meghan to submit publicly, or let her departure justify future exclusion. William was suddenly placed in danger as well. He had approved containment measures, but he now had to confront the possibility that a plan created under his authority had been sharpened into a weapon without his full knowledge. Kate contacted Harry privately. She admitted she knew a contingency plan existed, but insisted she had never known the exact words Camilla intended to use. Harry did not accuse her. He did not forgive her either. The inheritance dispute remained unresolved, but the family had crossed into something more dangerous. Meghan's walkout was no longer one evening scandal. It had become the beginning of a future battle over Diana's legacy, the place of Harry's children, and who had the right to control royal memory. Because Meghan may have left the room that night, but the conflict she exposed remained inside the palace, waiting for the next ceremony, the next inheritance decision, and the next silence powerful enough to divide the monarchy again.